Something shifted in me at that moment, like a switch flipping. I owed her nothing. She said it so matter-of-factly, without hesitation, without warmth. A verdict handed down by a judge I'd never agreed to stand before. I stood there letting the words settle. They should have hurt. Maybe a few months ago they would have. But right then, in the quiet of our kitchen, with the low hum of the fridge filling the silence between us, I felt something else entirely. A sharp, quiet understanding. Something in me just shut off. I didn't argue, I didn't ask why. I didn't remind her of everything I had given, of the time, the effort, the moments I had thought meant something. I just gave a small nod. Okay, that was it. That was all I said. She barely reacted, eyes still on her phone, scrolling like I just mentioned a slight chance of rain tomorrow. And that was her mistake. She was expecting something else. A fight, a plea, maybe even desperation. What she didn't expect was for me to take her words exactly as they were. That night, I didn't tell her goodnight. The next morning, I left without a kiss. I didn't ask how she slept. I didn't check in during the day. Didn't ask about her plans. Didn't wait for her to come home. Didn't even glance her way when she walked into the room. She had drawn the line. I just stepped back. At first, she didn't notice. Or maybe she did and assumed I was just sulking, waiting for the moment I'd cave. Just like every time before, she carried on, the same as always, coming home late without a word, glued to her phone, giving me only the barest acknowledgement. That was fine. She thought this was a game, that I was trying to prove a point. What she didn't understand was that this wasn't temporary. This wasn't a reaction. She had set the terms. I was just following them. A week went by and I started catching her watching me. Just quick glances at first, the kind she thought I wouldn't notice. After 2 weeks, that usual smug edge in her voice started to waver. By the third week, she hesitated before walking out the door. 4 weeks in, and she was coming undone. At first, she tried to poke at me, subtle little provocations. She put extra effort into how she looked before going out, adjusting her dress in front of me, taking just a little too long in the mirror. She dropped casual mentions of plans with people I'd never heard of, watching me, waiting for a reaction. I gave her nothing. Then came the laughter, too bright, too forced, loud enough for me to hear from across the room as she scrolled through her phone. I didn't flinch. Next, she tried conversation, easing into it like nothing had changed. Did you see that thing on the news? I ran into an old friend today. Little attempts to pull things back to normal without addressing the obvious shift. I responded when necessary, but only in short, even tones. Never more than what was required. By the 5th week, the unease had settled in completely. She started coming home earlier, made excuses to linger nearby, hovering like she was waiting for me to speak first. One night, she finally closed the space between us, settling next to me on the couch and resting a hand on my knee. An old gesture that once might have fixed it everything. I didn't move away, but I didn't acknowledge it either. Just sat there, quiet and still. After a few minutes, she pulled her hand back. I heard the breath she let out, sharp, unsteady. Then she got up and left the room. That was the moment it hit her. This wasn't something she could smooth over. At first, she'd treated my silence like a game, an irritation, a minor rebellion I'd eventually give up on, like always. But now I saw it in her. The hesitation before she spoke, the way she lingered in doorways, debating whether to say something, the way she dressed up more often, her perfume heavier, her hair perfectly done, even when she had no plans to leave the house. She was waiting for me to notice her again, but I didn't. I let her sit in the silence she had created. It started small. I stopped reacting, stopped engaging. When she spoke, I answered only when necessary. A yes if it was needed, a no if that was enough. She tested me, slipping little barbs into conversation, places she'd been, people she'd met, names I didn't recognize. A year ago, I would have asked. Now all she got was a quiet, "That's nice." Her frustration grew. She started staying in more, skipping nights out that I knew she'd had planned. I never asked why. Then she started pushing her way back into my space, sitting next to me when I watched TV, standing a little too close when we passed each other in the kitchen, waiting for me to give in. I didn't react. She tossed and turned at night, unable to settle. Maybe it was guilt, maybe frustration, probably both. By the 6th week, the cracks started to show. I was on my way to bed when she spoke behind me, her voice quieter than usual. "Are you mad at me?" I turned slowly, meeting her gaze for the first time in days. She looked smaller, almost uncertain, like she wasn't sure how I'd respond. Why would I be mad at you? My tone was neutral, giving nothing away. She hesitated. She had no real answer. Because the truth was, I hadn't accused her of anything. I hadn't started an argument, hadn't confronted her, hadn't even asked questions. I had just pulled away, and now she was feeling the weight of it. She shook her head quickly, dismissing whatever thought had made her speak in the first place. "Never mind," she muttered, before turning away. I didn't say another word, just went to bed. That night, she barely slept. A few days later, she tried a different approach. I was at the dining table, reading, when she placed her phone in front of me. Unlocked, open, left there deliberately, an invitation, a test. Not long ago, that phone had been off limits, always locked, never left in my sight. Now she wanted me to see it. She wanted me to look, to search, to find something, to demand answers, to prove that I still cared enough to be upset. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I slid the phone back toward her without even glancing at the screen. "You got a message," I said, my voice casual, uninterested. For a split second, I saw it, frustration flashing in her eyes before she masked it. That night, I caught her watching me again. But this time, it wasn't irritation or even anger. It was something else, something closer to fear, like she was realizing, maybe for the first time, that she had miscalculated. Maybe I wasn't waiting for her to come back. Maybe I had already left. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't coming back at all. The first real crack appeared when I heard it. A faint, stifled sound from behind the bathroom door. Crying. It was barely there, muffled, like she was pressing her face into a towel to keep me from hearing. I didn't move, didn't acknowledge it. I sat in the living room, staring at the pages of a book I wasn't really reading. A month ago, the sound of her crying would have made me drop everything. Now, it barely registered. Wasn't this what she wanted? She had made it clear. I wasn't entitled to her affection. So I had simply given her exactly what she asked for. The next morning, she was suddenly in a bright, almost forced mood. "Good morning," she said as I walked past her in the kitchen. I nodded, reaching for my coffee without breaking stride. She hesitated, waiting for more. When I didn't offer anything, she bit her lip and tried again. "I was thinking, maybe we could do something this weekend. That little place by the lake. Testing the waters, searching for something." I took a sip of coffee. "I have plans." A simple, neutral response. But I saw the way her body tensed, how quickly the artificial cheer disappeared from her face. She had never considered this outcome. That one day I simply wouldn't be available. That I wouldn't drop everything for her like I always had. "Oh," she said quietly. I walked out before she could add anything else. That's when the unraveling began. She started hovering, pacing the house with restless energy hidden beneath a thin layer of control. Her texts became more frequent, not just on her phone but on her laptop. Tabs closed in a hurry whenever I walked past. She thought I didn't notice, but I noticed everything. She dressed up more, even for the most meaningless errands. Before leaving, she would glance at me, waiting for a reaction. I never gave her one. Then one night, she didn't come home until after midnight. I heard the door creak open, her footsteps cautious as she stepped inside. She paused at our bedroom door, probably expecting me to ask where she had been. I didn't. She let out a slow breath, resignation, maybe even disappointment. And when she finally slipped into bed beside me, she didn't sleep. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, lost in whatever thoughts kept her restless. That was the moment I knew for sure. She had been with someone else, and yet she was the one who couldn't sleep, the one trapped in her own choices. Then came the breaking point. I was sitting at the kitchen counter, finishing my coffee, when she suddenly slammed her phone down in front of me. "Ask me," she snapped. I blinked, looking up at her for the first time in days. "Ask you what?" My voice was calm, steady. Her breathing was uneven, her eyes wild with something between desperation and frustration. "Where I was last night," she said, her voice edged with defiance, daring me to react. I met her gaze and held it, letting the silence stretch between us. Then, with a shrug, I answered, "I don't care." 3 words. That was all it took. The anger on her face cracked, giving way to something else. Something raw, something afraid. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, because she understood, finally, that I wasn't ignoring her. I wasn't punishing her. I was just done. She had spent so much time trying to prove she had power over me, pushing, testing, waiting for me to break. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I felt nothing. And that terrified her more than anything else, because now she had truly lost me, and she was completely alone. She didn't speak after that, just stood there, staring at me like she was willing me to take it back, to show some kind of emotion, anger, pain, disgust, anything that proved she still had control. But I just took another sip of coffee. She turned sharply and stormed out of the kitchen. Upstairs, I heard drawers slamming, the hurried pacing of someone unraveling. She was spiraling. Fast. Good. Let her. That night, when I walked through the door, she was waiting, sitting on the couch, her phone beside her, screen face down. That was new. She had changed into an old sweater I hadn't seen in months. Her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look younger, softer. "Hey," she said, quiet this time. I raised an eyebrow. It was the first time in weeks she had spoken to me without an edge of demand in her voice. I made dinner. I glanced at the table. 2 plates. Candlelight. An effort, sure, but not for me. It was for her. She still thought this was something she could fix, that if she played it right, if she found the right combination of words and gestures, I would fold. "I already ate," I said, my voice flat as I turned toward the stairs. Before I could take another step, her voice caught me. "John, please." I stopped, turned, waited. Her eyes were already glassy, but she forced a smile, trying to close the space between us. "We don't have to do this. We can just talk. Talk." Now she wanted to talk. After months of pushing me away, after her making it clear I had no claim to her affection, after treating me like an afterthought, now suddenly a conversation was supposed to fix everything? I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. "You don't get to do this now." She flinched like the words had struck her. I made mistakes," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. For the first time, she was the one searching my face, looking for something. Understanding. Forgiveness. Hope. She found nothing. "Yeah, son," I said, my voice unreadable. "You did." I turned and walked upstairs. She didn't follow. The next day, the unraveling continued. She hovered, lingering in doorways, staying close whenever I was home. I could feel her waiting, hoping I'd acknowledge her. I never did. She switched tactics, anger, guilt, sadness, cycling through every emotion, trying to get a reaction. But it was useless. I had nothing left to give. And she knew it. The same woman who once took pleasure in making me feel small was now reaching for anything. Any part of me she could still grasp. But there was nothing left to hold on to. Then came the final blow, a name I never expected to hear. "It was a mistake," she whispered late one night. I was in our bedroom, folding laundry, barely paying attention. "What was?" She hesitated, swallowed hard. "Him." Finally, she had said it. The confirmation I had known all along. She had been with someone else, and now that she had lost control, she was scrambling to take it back. I nodded slowly, smoothing out the crease in my shirt. "Good to know." She exhaled sharply and stepped closer. It didn't mean anything. I turned just enough to meet her eyes, pleading, desperate, full of regret. "Neither do you." Her breath hitched. That was it. That was the moment she shattered completely. She stumbled back, lips parting like she wanted to argue, to explain, to beg. But she couldn't. She had nothing left to bargain with. The affection she once withheld so easily, now she was desperate to give it. The loyalty she tossed aside without a second thought, now she was clawing to get it back. But it didn't matter. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. I didn't need to say anything else. I picked up my folded clothes and walked past her. She didn't stop me. She didn't even try, because for the first time she understood. I wasn't hers anymore, and she was nothing to me. I have selected 2 more videos that I think you will enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot.